Just done it.
Done it? All right, cool. I will, I'll be more careful with everything I say from this point going forward. But I do want to say welcome to everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Garrett Dempsey, and Jerry Hasbacker and I are co-chairs of the Southeast Michigan group of the Sierra Club. Really appreciate you all coming out to be with us tonight and to hear our great presenter Missy and all that information about what's going on over in Ann Arbor. Just got a couple of announcements that we'll go through as we start the meeting. I guess one thing I just want to let folks know in terms of the sort of practice that we try to have with our presentations is once Missy starts, we'll ask everybody to stay on audio mute just to minimize any sort of accidental distractions while she's talking. Myself and some of the other Southeast Michigan group executive committee members will be like looking at the chat. So if there's a question or a comment or something that you're thinking of in the moment, and you want to just get it on there so that we can have Missy take a look at it and think about it later, please feel free to use that chat to throw that question in. And then typically what we'll do is at the end of her presentation and we have some question and answer, we can make sure we pull out those questions from the chat.
Garrett, are you
Jane,
aware the chat is disabled right now?
Oh, that's really important to know. Thank you, Jane.
Been there.
Been there. Jerry, do you can you try to enable the chat? I've never experienced that in terms of a disabled chat.
Can you see me say hello? It's open for me.
Oh, I did. Okay, I see it.
Oh.
Try it now, Jane. See if you're able to jump in there and say something with the chat. I do see that something missing. No, nothing for you, huh? I wonder if it's because you and Jerry can anybody else? Missy and Jerry are both hosts and co-hosts. Can anyone else?
Not available to others.
Not available to others. Okay.
I was able to unmute mine.
Was that Sandra?
Yes.
Did you say unmute? You mean unmute your microphone, or were you referring to the chat? Okay. Can you try typing something into the chat though, like into the chat box? Yeah, I see that. For me too, Jerry, it says the same thing, chat disabled, and I'm not a host or co-host. So maybe can you try maybe fiddling around, or if somebody on this call can give us some technical support of, oh, Jane seems to know.
If you make me a co-host, I'll go in there and try and fiddle around.
Oh yeah.
Easier than trying to explain how to do it. I don't know if you can do it once the meeting started, though. I've had that experience where once it's going, it's too late.
Garrett, you're a co-host. You can make her a co-host.
Okay.
Can you try now?
All right.
Can someone try? I might have just changed the setting. I might not have.
I'm sorry?
You can you do it now? I think I fixed it.
Now we got it.
Yes, it's working now.
Got
Yep.
a thumbs up?
Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. All right. Look at that. What do they call that? Like crowdsourcing? Crowdsourcing problem solving. That's awesome. Jane, that's a thank you for that comment. So now that our chat is working, that is one way that we encourage you to just drop in some questions or comments while Missy is doing her presentation, and then we can pull those forward when we're doing the Q&A. And the intention is that we'll be able to have some dialogue either through the chat or just with people coming off mute after the presentation. With that, I would like to we've got a couple of announcements just about general Sierra Club business. The first thing I just want to announce to everybody is I volunteer with the Inspiring Connections Outdoors program, Detroit ICO. And ICO, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a Sierra Club initiative. Groups from all over the country can start them. And it's really about just reducing barriers to access to nature, typically for young people, but it can be any sort of community, serving any community that has barriers to accessing the outdoors. And the National ICO program, with a bunch of groups around the country, is putting on online Adventure Film Festival, February 20th and 21st. So in the chat, I just put the link to the ICO Film Fest. It's going to be on a Saturday and a Sunday night on the 20th and the 21st. from 7 to 9 p.m. each night. The first evening is a series of professionally produced short films, all about kind of adventure and the outdoors and a whole diverse set of stories, anywhere from 3-minute films to 20-minute films. And then the second evening, Sunday night, will be a series of more kind of homegrown video features from a lot of different communities across the country where ICO programs exist. So there's going to be a 5-minute video from Detroit about one of the partners that the Sierra Club works with in the Detroit Outdoors program and their camping trip in Scout Hollow and Rouge Park. And it's a fundraiser for ICO, but the tickets are free. So if you're interested, or if you know anyone else that might be interested in seeing some really compelling, exciting, and interesting, I think, stories about people connecting with nature, please feel free to share that link with them or to join yourself. Like I said, it's a free to join. You just have to register ahead of time, and then you'll get the link to watch the films those evenings. I see Joanne saying details are now posted on the SEMG meetup site too for the ICO Film Fest. So thank you for posting that, Joanne, so other people can see. Jerry, I know you wanted to make an announcement about the Turn Oakland County Green campaign.
Yes, and I was going to share my screen, but I've, yes, we have, now if you can see my screen, this happens to be about Oakland County, but we know that every country, every state, every county, every city should have a climate action plan, because this is such an important issue. And it's just not at the top of the Sierra Club's list, obviously. It's at the top of a lot of other people's list. But if you happen to be in Oakland County, there's a group, as you can see, called Turn Oakland County Green. And there's a petition that you can sign at the top. It's not only about climate, it's about justice and also about jobs. And the idea here with Oakland County is to end emissions by county operations by 2030 and emissions countywide by 2050. And a little further down, then there's a place to click here to volunteer, and you can see the Sierra Club is listed here too. So it's an important issue that particularly Oakland County has got is working on, except that we have a speaker tonight from Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor is not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk, and we're going to find all about it tonight. So our guest, Dr. Missy Stults, is the Sustainability and Innovations Manager for the City of Ann Arbor. In this role, she works with all city operations, residents, businesses, the University of Michigan, nonprofits, and others to make Ann Arbor one of the most sustainable and equitable cities in America. Prior to joining the city, Missy worked with cities and tribal communities to advance their climate and sustainability goals, and as a consultant to philanthropic organizations, helping them integrate resilience thinking into their investment portfolios. Prior to this, Missy was the climate director for a nonprofit called ICLEI-USA, where she worked with hundreds of US cities on climate-related activities. Missy has a PhD in urban resilience from the University of Michigan, a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, and undergraduate degrees in marine biology and environmental science from the University of New England. Tonight, as the co-architect of Ann Arbor's A2ZERO community-wide carbon neutrality plan by 2030, Dr. Missy Stults will discuss the plan's history, structure, and significance for Ann Arbor and the greater community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Missy.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming tonight and welcoming me into your homes, your bedrooms, your offices, whatever space you're in. You are with me in a converted closet, which is now my office in virtual space. So thank you very much, just kind of acknowledging where we are. I also want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Ann Arbor, which is the traditional ancestral land of the Anishinaabe, which was extracted from them. And so I want to honor the land that I stand on, that I have not rightly inherited at this moment. So welcome. It is my great pleasure to talk to you about A2ZERO, which is our carbon neutrality plan. But more than that, it is the framework, it is the approach, it is the program, it is all of the programs that inspire us to achieve a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality in a decade. It's ambitious, it's laudable, and we often say it's walking the line of possibility. And I feel that every day. Sometimes I get on the impossible side, sometimes I'm on the possible side, and it's a really fun landscape. So what I want to do today, as Jerry mentioned, is a rapid introduction to how we created A2ZERO, because I know you care a lot and are looking at models around the country for how you might jumpstart some work in your spaces. And then I want to just give an overview of what is in A2ZERO. And then I have just opportunities that are out there. There are things we're doing right now, because of course, a plan is just a plan. What matters is how you operationalize it. And some of the things that we're working on, I'll talk about. A core tenet of our work is transferability and replicability. Caution, in the first minute, you've already picked up, I talk really fast. So if you need me to slow down, feel free to I can see a few of you just frantically wave your hands at me and I will try to slow down. But I love what I do, and sometimes it just comes out in speed. So I'll try to slow down for you. So here we go. I'm not going to belabor this, but this is just to say it's been a long journey for the city of Ann Arbor. The city started its kind of formal climate work in '81 when it formed an energy advisory committee and launched its first energy plan. Then in the 2000s, the knots, we adopted a greenbelt millage and really were focused on land conservation. We formed an environmental commission. In the teens, we launched a sustainability framework that was actually integrated into our master plan that thought about the 3 pillars of sustainability and really focusing on institutionalizing that and how the city thinks and operates. We had a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 90% by 2050, which at that time was it was a step up because most places were committing to an 80% reduction by 2050. And there were interim targets, including a 25% reduction by 2025. We formed a transportation commission, joined the We Are Still In campaign, kind of as we rounded out last decade. And then in 2019, November of 2019, our city council passed a climate emergency declaration. And I will share these slides with anyone that's interested, so don't worry about this. What I'm sharing here is the actual resolved clauses I turned into goal statements. So our council said, we believe there's an emergency. We believe that we have to act. And they set the goal of being carbon neutral, again, as an entire community. So not just government operations, every business, institution, transportation sector, you name it, by 2030. And I'll tell you a little secret. They changed the date on the floor. Staff proposed 2035, and they're like, why not 2030? I'm like, okay. So, and then in the next breath, they said, but without any more funding or any more staff. So I will happily talk about how we've countered that narrative and said, no, that's not actually acceptable. But there's a whole arc in this work that's fascinating. So they set this target, and then they said, this was on November 4th, right? You can see in 2019. They said, we want to make a statement for Earth Day in 2020 because Ann Arbor happens to be the community where the first Earth Day celebration happened. And that's because the University of Michigan was centered around it, and the University of Michigan has their winter break early. And so we were able to do a big event before everyone else did a big event. And it was the 50th anniversary last year, as you know, of Earth Day. And so we wanted to kind of come out for this next decade and say, we're ready, we're standing, we're raising our hands, we want to lead again. We want to kind of get back to that leadership that we had held really tight. So they said, you have until March 31st to give us a plan for how we're going to be carbon neutral. I don't know if anyone's doing really quick math, but let me just tell you, that's 82 working days they gave us to create a plan for carbon neutrality. So we're like, all right, here we go. So this is what we did. Our process was, the easiest way for me to describe it is like a funnel. So into the funnel, the opening is really, really wide. And throughout the whole process, we took, of course, public input. We ran 3 public surveys. The first was about 250 respondents. The next 2 were over 1,000. So they were, we had enough numbers for some generalizability for what our responses were. So we had public input, we ran surveys. We did 68 public events in 82 days. And that was only because we had partners. Today, we're at 75 partner organizations that are with us on our journey. They were with us in the planning process. And the partners were extensions into very diverse communities. Sure, for sure. The Sierra Club was a partner for us. They were a critical partner, but so was our Affordable Housing Alliance. And so was our NAACP chapter. And so was our Center for Disability Services and Meals on Wheels, who was serving homebound residents, and our Veterans Affairs groups. And so we had this really broad coalition of people that did not say, we support carbon neutrality, because that's not what we asked. We said, to be a partner, you commit to working with us to bring your stakeholders' input into the planning process. Right. So the landlords, actually, our landlords are organized in Ann Arbor, and they joined us as a partner because they wanted to be at the table setting the policy and the direction for this work. So we brought these partners on. And another secret, they're still partners. Everyone is still with us on the journey, and we've pivoted now to implementation. And I think that's part of the key of why 82 days was possible, because we had such a broad coalition that felt heard and really was heard and helped co-create the process. I have a visitor, so please hold. Good night, sweetie.
Can I have water if you have any?
Yeah, you can have some. Yeah. It's this one. Sorry, please hold. So we had all of these partner organizations, which were instrumental in helping us get more public input. Of course, we leaned pretty heavily on peer cities around the nation. So we certainly talked to Detroit and Grand Rapids, which we talked to very, very frequently, and Lansing and Traverse City. But we also talked to Boulder and Berkeley and Boston. I'm just going to stick with B's because that seems to be the theme, and New York and Houston and Seattle. And we were understanding really what are the progressive practices in this space. We're part of a lot of networks, so we're highly connected to other cities. Staff have expertise, right? I have a PhD in resilience, so I think about that a lot, what that means for systems and for people and the interconnection of systems. And so that played into this. And then we stood up 4 technical advisory committees. So we went out to our experts around energy, transportation, mobility, materials management, and resilience. And so these technical experts were really telling us, this is what it's going to take, technically take, to get to be carbon neutral. And our public was telling us, this is what we're going to accept, right? So that tension was always, it was built into the very beginning. It doesn't matter if it's technically possible and it is not socially palatable. It's dead. Right? It's not going to move. Politics are real. And so we wanted to find that kind of happy space. So these all go into the funnel. And the very first phase of our work was ideation. We say, throw it at us. What do you got? So every survey, every public engagement event for that first tranche of time focused exclusively on people telling us what they thought we should be doing. The second phase then was, now we've got this list, we need to prioritize it, right? Because all of that can't happen. And so I'll share at the end a prioritization framework we created to help do that. What we thought for the third phase was we were going to do what's called a carbon budget exercise. We were going to say to our community, we have this carbon budget, right? So we have these emissions, and here are all like slices of a pie, and those slices were mitigation strategies. So you have to build a pie, you have to close the gap, and you can pick anything that you want to close that gap. So we were going to really understand, you couldn't cheat, you couldn't like fill half the pie because you only like half the things. So we had designed this process with some outside partners to make this really interactive. And when we got to the end of phase 2, we knew that was disingenuous, because the answer was everything prioritized had to happen. There was no room. So going out and ask people to vote on what they wanted would have just been a false story. So instead, we pivoted to, how should we do this? So we were telling them, this is what it's going to take, but you help us understand the best mechanism. And we also started talking about appetite to pay, right? This isn't free. There's lots of ways that we could finance this work. Help us understand, like, what is your appetite to really integrate this into the way that we live and operate? So all of those things came together, along with a lot of work with our elected leaders, and we got our final A2ZERO plan. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say, as we went into all of these conversations, very, very early on, we knew we had to articulate the values. So what's the bedrock that we are planning on? And we have a really fascinating conversation that happens a lot in our community around equity and sustainability, but it doesn't always manifest in the projects or the activities that we do or that our community supports. So we just named it, and we said, if we're going to do this, first and foremost, equity has to be at the center. It's not a lens, because you can't take it off. It has to be at the center of what we're doing. So the bullet points were some characteristics of what an equitable process or outcome might look like. And there's more. The second, of course, is sustainable. And so here, what we're talking about, not sustainability in the way we think, of course, it has to be that, but more, this has to live, right? It is not useful if it sits on its shelf. It's also wrong. The very minute we publish it, technology will have shifted, politics will have shifted, appetite to do this work will have shifted. So we have to be okay with being directionally right and subjectively wrong. And that's just not common, but that's real life. Right? I'm sure we all make budgets in our life, and you go to the store and you blow it in one day and you autocorrect, right? So we knew we had to build a mechanism and a framework that allowed us to be flexible. And the last was transformation. And this one is one that we talk a lot about, but is probably the hardest to operationalize. And what I mean here is not only did we have to create systems that were okay to fail, I don't mean a bridge, right? Like that can never fail. What I mean is, how can we encourage people to think and act differently? How can we set up systems where we reward them for innovation, even if ideas do not work, because they're acknowledging that the system is broken? And so transformation at its core is acknowledging if we stay on the path that we are currently on, that is unsustainable, that is unequitable, that is unjust. If that is true, we either are complicit in the continuation of growing economic and social disparity, exacerbating racial inequality, of course, a changing climate. We're complicit in that. Or we disrupt that system. And when you disrupt that system, you're working on a transformational change. So this is really an uncomfortable topic, but it was core to what we talk about on our team. And now what's fascinating is, 9 months into this process, my team talks about transformation. They are brave in the ideas that they bring forward. They're willing on going out on a limb in many ways. And I think probably key to that is the process and the conversations we've gone through, and that I'll take a bullet for them, right? Like if they're doing the work, my job is to shield them from the backlash and make sure that they're protected and continue to be innovative, because old ideas aren't going to work. So I'll speed up here. Yeah.
Paul had a question that was kind of about your first phase. He just asked what questions were in the surveys. I don't know if that's something you can get into now, or if you want to talk about it later, but it seems.
Yeah, I can even show them. Maybe at the end I can pop them up. Again, the first one was really about what ideas do you have? And so we said, like, we're looking to be carbon neutral. What do you think the city should do? And then we started asking explicitly, what should we do around energy? What should we do around transportation? And we just took ideas. The second survey then, we had generated a list of actions and we asked them to prioritize them. So in the transportation sector, every sector, we took like the top 10 that our technical advisors had recommended, and we let people kind of play with them and see where there was just no willingness to move something forward. And then the last one really focused on things like, should this be regulated? Should this be incented? Should we charge premiums for products? How do you get information? How do you want to engage in this? Really kind of more the machinations of how do we do it now?
And Frank just asked what the 3 E's were on that last slide.
Oh, so funny because it's blocked with my screen. It would be equity, environment, economy. Thank you. So we have a vision that guides our work, and it is this, that together we're creating and implementing a just transition to carbon neutrality by the year 2030. We hired a graphic artist actually when we were far into the process, and we knew like these overarching strategies, which I'll talk about just momentarily, and they're just hard, for people to understand. And so having a graphic artist was really important to make people see, when we talk about powering our electric grid, like that's not a destruction of your downtown, right? It looks like this, it feels like this. Unfortunately, COVID sacrificed some of the additional renderings that we were doing, but I hope in the very near future, we'll be engaging with this artist to actually do like murals in key parks and other areas, so people really see this and see this like as a part of their daily life. I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but of course, if you're going to reduce your emissions, you need to know what your emissions are. So these are our greenhouse gas emissions broken down by sector and by source. Actually, source isn't on here. Well, cat out of the bag, source for us, our largest source of emissions is from electricity. I'm going to guess it is for you as well. Our grid is not clean. So, and mostly buildings, especially now in the pandemic. So we have a heavy focus on, of course, our built infrastructure, The University of Michigan is about a third of our community emissions. So that's obviously a really important partner in a lot of this work. And a growing source of emissions is commuting. So we have roughly just under 30% of emissions are from the transportation sector. We have about 85,000 vehicles, single occupancy vehicles that were coming into the city pre-COVID every day. We're a population of 120,000, so that's a lot of vehicles coming in. And so that had to frame our thinking, right? If we're going to reduce transportation emissions, we have to acknowledge it's not just Garrett and I moving from our house to the grocery store, it's also people coming in and how we help them move regionally. So all of that got us to A2ZERO, the plan, the framework, the policy. At its core, this is like every other plan. It's a long document with different kind of appendices and more digestible nuggets. At its core are these colored stripes, and those are our strategies. We have 7 overarching strategies that everything sort of stands upon. I call these the rock or the foundation. These are fairly immovable. Other things will change. Maybe these will be tweaked, but generally speaking, you have to do these things to achieve carbon neutrality. So the first is we need to power our electrical grid with 100% renewable energy. I think we know that is true. I heard the campaign earlier. Like, this is something we know has to move. Second, we have to electrify, right? We've got to get off. We've got to switch our appliances and our vehicles from gas, propane, coal. Yes, everything is going to transition over to electric. The third is we've got to improve the efficiency of our entire life. And what's different in these are our 3 primary energy strategies that historically, for those of us in the field, we have always led with energy efficiency. And that makes a lot of sense for many reasons. The best energy is the energy you never use. But here's the kick. I don't have time. I have 10 years to figure out how we're going to get our whole community to 0 emissions. We have to bundle these strategies. I have to do efficiency at the same time that I'm doing beneficial electrification, and at the same time that I'm working on local microgrids or distributed generation to the extent that I can. So we're trying to design programs that take all of these piecemeal kind of itty-bitty incremental progress and make significant strides forward. And a lot of our time has been in this space. And I will say the electrification work is super fun and fascinating, and just isn't as far along as the renewable energy space and the energy efficiency space. So that's the piece that we're kind of trailing, and I'm happy to talk about what I think is really fascinating work that's happening with the team and with some of our community partners, including meetings we just had today. Just to kind of round this out, the 4th strategy we have is reducing the miles we travel in our vehicles by at least 50%. COVID showed us this was possible. Pre-COVID, this was the strategy that caused me the most heartburn. Everything else I knew would come, right? I knew that technology was moving fast enough. I saw the future for all the energy systems, but 4 is inherently a behavioral strategy. I have to not only have the technology available for people to either walk or bike, land use has to change, but they have to change. They have to take it. They have to get out of their car and do things. I can change your grid and have power, clean power flowing into your house, and you can still turn on your light. You don't have to do a lot different. So strategy 4 always caused me heartburn. This is the one silver lining for me with COVID, is that I now know it is not equal in terms of who can work remotely, but that a lot of the things that we said were impossible to switch to remote work are possible. The 5th is changing our relationship with materials and how we use them. Another way to frame the 5th is it's about a circular economy. How do things never leave the loop, just get repurposed, refurbished, kind of go to an alternative life? The 6th is no matter what we do, the impacts of climate change are already here and they're going to get worse. We need to be investing in the resilience of our people and our place and the intersection of those. And then the last is the catch-all. So this is the strategy or the actions that are in this strategy are things that don't belong in any other bucket because they belong in every other bucket. So we run a grant program. We have our equity programs that are specifically targeted on racial equity. Those live in this kind of other box. There are 44 actions that fall out of those 7 strategies. These will change, guaranteed. And we have a mechanism to change them. And I'll talk about that, I think, on the next slide. But they're kind of grouped broadly. The first 4 are around 100% renewable energy, and then they fall sequentially throughout. Just to give you a sense, right now the team is working on 22. So my team is actively moving 22 initiatives forward in this area, which I'm really proud of. And, we're constantly trying to find avenues to move others forward. So what we have is, of course, this plan, but that's not all. We have a governance framework because the plan, as I said, was supposed to be living. And so what does that mean? Well, the governance framework talks about who has, who gives input into the plan, when we're going to open that plan up and make changes, how power is distributed throughout this. It identifies the key stakeholders. And this was something that was really important. So there was ownership over this plan. People sort of knew that they mattered in different ways and where they could give input into this. And I think in some ways that cooled some tempers when people didn't like something in there. They knew there would be an opportunity to revisit it. But that said, you can't just take something out because you don't like it. And you can't put something in because you love it. Everything that goes into this plan has to run through our prioritization framework. Everything that's in this plan as an action ran through a prioritization framework, and it fell out as the top strategies. So if you come with an idea that you want to see in this plan, I have to run it through this framework for consistency. It has to have the same gravitas as what's currently in there. And if it does, and it scores high enough, and there's technical criteria here, there's societal co-benefit criteria, and of course there's greenhouse gas reduction criteria here. If it scores high enough, it can bump things off, or it can be added into the plan. But if it does not, it goes into to be considered later pile. And then the last, we did an investment plan, because the money for this isn't magically going to materialize. So we ran through every single action. Not only did we, of course, quantify the greenhouse gas potential and the sequencing, the timeline by when things would have to come online to have the desired impact. We did a staffing plan, how many people had to be full-time staff, how many partner organizations, how many other internal staff would we have to pull to maintain some of these initiatives, but how are we going to pay for this? And that is completely a shot in the dark. Right? So we priced everything out in this plan. And then we said, here's one possible way these initiatives could be financed. And now we're exploring lots of things. The Biden administration has new potential for us. And of course, that wasn't the world we were in when we were doing this plan. So that investment scenario is really directional. It is not, I don't expect that we are going to follow the majority of what is in there. It is a direction for us to be moving in. So let me pivot to what we're doing right now. One thing I wanted to share with you is, I mentioned we have this governance committee. To achieve our goals, we have to work with partner institutions. So we have our 75 partner organizations, which is fabulous, but we also have what's called the Carbon Neutrality Coordinating Committee, and it is the organizations you see here. So 6 organizations in the community, that are instrumental to achieving our goals. Some of them have stated carbon neutrality commitments, others are working on it, or others we're going to bring along with us. So we've got our transit authority, our public schools, of course, us, the county, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and the University of Michigan. And I happen to sit on the University of Michigan's Carbon Neutrality Committee, so helping to make connections as we're making recommendations to President Schlissel on what the university should do. So to close out, just some ideas to share. I'll go through these super fast so we leave more time for questions. We, right now, in fact, the team is having a town hall on energy disclosure and benchmarking. So we have a draft ordinance that we worked with a task force of commercial property owners and landlords to create. And it would be requiring that every year larger buildings have to disclose their energy and water consumption. So there's no penalty for performance. It's not a performance. But how in the world are we going to be able to highlight our vanguards and our high performers if we don't know they're high performers? And how are we going to be able to help low performers if we don't know they're low performers? So this is something that we're looking, hopefully, I checked in a minute ago and things are going well, but we'll see how this goes. But our goal is to have this before City Council in the second quarter of this year for formal adoption. In addition, we're working on a time of marketing for single family homes. So this would mean when you sold your home, you have to disclose an energy score. So people may not care, just like if you don't have kids, you may not care about the great schools scores that you get, but you may. And so this is a really important element for us to make sure every infrastructure in the community is disclosing energy usage. We run a Solarize program. This is one of the wild successes that we have had in our first year of existence. And what this is a neighborhood bulk buy program. So we vetted with Michigan Saves, our state's green bank, our local solar installers. And what happens is someone comes forward, Jane comes forward and says, I really, really want solar on my house, but I don't just want solar on my house. I want my friends to get solar because it matters to me, right? And I have a lot of friends who I think are kind of interested. So what would happen is our Solarize coordinator would work with you. You would get a list of all of the solar contractors in the region that participate. You'd pick one that you liked. You'd interview them, whatever you need to do. You like them because they're the best price. You like them because you're their neighbor. You go to church together, whatever. You pick your contractor. Then you invite your friends right now to a Zoom meeting, your neighbors, your friends, your family, and you share your passion for solar. And the Solarize contractor who works for the city, so she doesn't get any resources from anyone else. She just talks about the solar process, what it's like, how it works, what answers questions, things people don't know. And because you're with your friends and your neighbors, people talk in ways they wouldn't in a public setting where they don't know people. And so they have this great conversation. And then at the end, there's a time space and people can ask for quotes from the contractor that Jane has picked. And if 3 people, including Jane, move forward with solar, they all get 5% off. If 5 people move forward with solar, they all get 10%. And if 10 or more move forward, they all get 15% off. And the reason is the solar contractor didn't have to do outreach and marketing, so they're passing their savings on to you. We are running, I think we're about to launch our 10th, and everyone has hit 15%. And through this program in 1 year, we've gotten almost 1 megawatt of rooftop solar up in Ann Arbor. That wouldn't have gone up. That is a lot. The average size system in Ann Arbor is about 7 kilowatts. To get to 1 megawatt, that's a lot of houses that are moving forward. So we're really excited by this program. We actually adopted an EV ordinance about 2 weeks ago as a community. What that means is every new development and major renovation has to either be EV capable, EV ready, or EV installed. And the difference has to do with, you have to have the electrical period set up. Do you actually have all the infrastructure in place? And finally, do you have the charger, like all that infrastructure and the charger so people can charge day one? And there's an entire parking chart that talks about who has to do what, but this was adopted. And now we're working on our holistic EV community strategy. So how we're pairing everything else. Where should chargers go? Where does our grid have capacity? Where does the grid need upgrades? How are we tying in bus electrification? How are we helping residents get access to vehicles? How are we working in low-income communities where they're never going to be capable of putting, $30,000 down for a new EV? So all of this we're working through right now and hope to have our strategy finalized in the next few weeks. This is the ordinance I talked about. We are trying very hard to get community solar. You probably know in DT's territory, this is not allowed. But this is a really important policy objective for us. So we're playing at the state level. We're poking our utility. We intervene in rate cases against our utility. We partner very nicely with our utility as well. But this is one of the things that we think is really, really important because not everyone can access solar. Maybe you have beautiful shade trees that block your roof. Maybe you're a renter. Maybe you can't afford a $30,000 investment or a $20,000 investment. All of those are real. And so we just want more and more ways for people to be able to access renewable energy and the benefits it provides. So this is just an example, not necessarily of something we have, but of something that we're really interested in playing more of a legislative policy in the legislative policy space to try to see move forward. And then we're doing a lot of work on electrification. More investigating. So some of the things we are about to launch a range replacement, like your stovetop campaign. We chose that piece of appliance for a slew of reasons. I would say number one is public health for most folks. I'm going to guess most of you have a natural gas range. I did until about 3 weeks ago. They're not properly ventilated in most of our homes. And what that means is you are literally burning a fuel that is polluting your air. And in many situations, we've seen indoor air quality up to 100 times worse than what is legally allowable outdoors. And you are breathing that. You are trapping it in your home. And that has enormous health ramifications, especially during a pandemic where we are not outside. We are trapped in that space. That is a public health crisis, and people are not talking about it. And so we are actively working on getting folks to transition over to electric, ideally induction, because it's super efficient. And so we're going to do a campaign. We're talking to our local shops. I can't even think of the word, our distributors, where you might walk in, because this is an appliance that you can, most of us are comfortable enough to like walk into a box store and see and interact with. We're also testing a pilot neighborhood electrification health and safety campaign in one of our low-income minority neighborhoods. So that's super exciting. And then lastly, we're working on a sticker campaign where people commit and start taking the steps necessary to transition the bigger appliances like your water heater or your furnace to a heat pump or to an electric water heater when the time comes, because those need planning, right? Most of us aren't going to suddenly not have water for 7 days so we can find someone with an appliance to switch it up for us. So we're trying to get people to make that commitment and start taking the steps they need to take, like to upgrade their electrical panels. We are trying really, really hard to get more progressive building codes. We played at the international scale, sharing input, helping vote, learning about codes, and we were able to vote in the International Code Council. Now we're trying to get Michigan to be more progressive in terms of the code that we actually adopt, and giving flexibility by adopting appendices that allow municipalities to go further than the base state code. There's a lot of work that's happening here. We really want the Zero Code Appendix to be adopted. We just launched a 10,000 trees initiative. In fact, last night and this morning, we were on the phone with local nurseries planning how we're going to unveil this program. But the goal is to plant 10,000 trees on private property. We have a parallel goal to plant 10,000 trees in the next 10 years on public property. So 20,000 trees total going into the community. We run an ambassadors program. And what this is, we can't do this by ourselves. There's no way. So we launched this in the summer, next week we close out our first ambassador cohort. These are residents, constituents who are interested in carbon neutrality. They care. They're not necessarily trained in the topic, but they're passionate about it. And for 9 weeks, we've taken them through modules that mirror the A2ZERO plan and talks about how to operationalize it. What are the resources you have at your fingertips? What trainings do you need? How are you going to support each other? And they culminate in a project. So we set some money aside. They're actually going to do some demonstrable improvements in their neighborhoods, and they're an ambassador for life with us. So I'm really excited about this program. It's been the heart and soul of one of my team members, and he's done a great job. And then we run a grant program. So we give out up to $10,000 at one time. We have $100,000 set aside to grants for organizations doing something to support sustainability in the community. This would be one. A local nonprofit was doing food distribution, and they upped their game during COVID because they had to, but they had such demand that they then they pivoted pretty hard to have mobile stations to do education for youth whose parents were frontline workers and had to go, but no one was in the home with them. And so they just really stepped up. And so they were one of our grant recipients this summer. And then our website was tragic. And we finally updated that to make it much more easy for folks to engage and understand what's happening, because we're moving pretty fast. And this is the easiest way. We have a newsletter. There's a listserv you can sign up for to get blasts and what's happening. But there's also kind of fun stuff that keeps coming up. So with that, I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you for your patience.
That was awesome. It's also like inspiring to hear about all of this hard work and organized effort, like moving in a direction that we all sort of think about and work towards and hope for. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Stults. We got some questions too that I'm sure you can see them in the chat, but I've been looking at them so I can kind of go through them. From one of the earlier ones was from Dave Cottrill. He asked, are parks and forests listed in the carbon plan as a carbon sink?
They're not. Nope, we made the decision that we start from a baseline of our current emissions and go forward. So if we plant any more trees, if we buy and invest in any more parks, if we do any more land preservation, those will count, but our baseline does not. So we're not going to take credit for anything that currently is in the ground.
Dr. Herzog had a couple of, oh, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm just going to get in because some places where there might be some land that's a forest now, and then it gets developed. And so now instead of having 30 acres of forest, we've got a big development and no forest.
Yeah, so that is a different situation in that case. So what I wouldn't take is the park across the street from me staying a park. Like I wouldn't take credit for that because nothing changed.
Right.
In your situation, we've been working with others to understand the greenhouse gas implications of that kind of switch. And it's complicated because who's moving in? If I'm moving people, since my commute is a really significant part, if I'm actually capable of doing housing that gets workers in a place that lowers the range of their commute, well, I need to factor that in too. If I'm not, and I'm building high-end housing again, and I'm not making a difference, so we're trying to develop models that help us be a little bit more agnostic and honest about like what are we doing with our land use and where can we preserve. So it's a wonderful question, and we have a group of master students at the University of Michigan who are working with us to really understand the ecosystem benefits of different parcels of land so we can get that calculation a little more refined.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Herzog had a couple of questions. One was, how many people are on your team? And then the second one was, are you looking for other communities to join you in your legislative efforts, like community
Unequivocally, yes.
those things?
Yeah, to the, well, let me take the first. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to sound very spoiled. We have the largest team in Michigan, and I will say we are drastically understaffed for the task that we have. So we are 6 full-time people, which is amazing. I acknowledge that is true. And then I piece in things like where I can, like, can I get a little bit of money for a temp employee to stand something up? But we historically had been one-time full-time person with 2 part-time folks who came in. So one of the major pushes I've had is to really staff up. Our financial model calls for a staff of 15 in order to sustain this amount of work for the time that we want. In terms of legislative, unequivocally, yes, absolutely. And it's more than just legislation. Actually, if you look at our 75 partner organizations, our county is one of our partners. Other surrounding municipalities are partners in this work. We might have just recruited another community to be partners in this work this week because the impacts don't respect geopolitical boundaries, right? And the solutions should not also respect geopolitical boundaries. That doesn't make sense. If it did, well, I just broke one of my core tenets, which is equity, because I'm a high capacity, wealthy community. Shame on me for not working with others to expand, to learn from them. And candidly, we don't have time. So I steal prolifically from my peers. So that said, I'd say yes to partnership if other municipalities want to come in and work with us on initiatives. 2, yes to legislative work. And 3, just today, we're working on an ask for Whitmer for a stimulus, green and equitable stimulus. And that would be really delightful if we could send it as a cohort of municipalities and say, if federal stimulus aid comes and it flows through the state, please make sure that all dollars go and are distributed to building better, not building back. More than you wanted, sorry.
Charlie had a question asking if you had some recommendations for, any municipality that might just be starting to consider a commitment to a net zero plan.
I would not hesitate to build a coalition. You are much more powerful together. That I don't know that this is a recommendation, but I'm going to share something pretty candidly that is shocking to me. I chose to work for Ann Arbor. I like many folks we have other opportunities in the world, but I wanted to do this. Like I wanted to get the on the ground change. And the very first constituent interaction I had literally went like this. Well, you're not as incompetent as I thought you would be. Right. And that reaction, like, it's funny, right? Because people do have this sense that like government people, they sort of go and it's kind of where they die. That has not been my experience, but that is a piece of advice I would give is meet the folks in your government who are doing this work, because chances are they probably do care a lot. They also know how to get it done. So if you can form an alliance with them, they know how to play the bureaucracy, how to navigate the ins and outs. And you can be, I have partnerships with my community groups where sometimes we talk and I'm like, I'm really stuck here. I'm going to walk out and you can walk in, right? Because I can't go where you can go. But then there are times where I say, I need you to step out, right? I'm working on a legislative thing and you're creating really good noise in the background, but now your noise is going to destroy something I'm working on. I need you to step out. And I have that kind of candid relationship with a lot of our partners where I think we trust each other, that we really do care about the same thing and we want the same outcomes. And so that's a dance that we have to do.
This is a technical question. When you
All
mentioned
right.
induction around cooktops,
Yeah.
are you talking about cooktops or another sort of induction reference?
Induction cooktops, stovetops. Yeah, which I just, mine's coming from Big George in Ann Arbor. Very excited. Carbon
Sure.
sequestration.
Okay.
I just saw it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're talking about. This is in some areas pretty advanced, in other areas pretty emergent. You know, the best carbon sucking thing I found is that tree that's sitting outside. So we want to incentivize more green infrastructure, natural infrastructure. There's just so many beautiful co-benefits. We've had some folks make pitches to us about carbon sequestration, like different techniques and technologies. Most of what they've pitched to us though are big, like they're big pieces. And so we just don't have land. Like we don't have open space for something like that. And the only place we do have open space is our landfill. And I am actively working to make that a 24 megawatt solar install. So we're pretty far in that process. So I just don't have space for that technology. One fun thing though, is with researchers at the University of Michigan, we are trying to bring some carbon sequestering cement into some of our sidewalks. So it's like a pilot to see how much does it actually absorb, how does it perform. Cement is really GHG intensive. So they designed a process that is much less. I think it's like 20% of the GHG emissions from historical cement production. And then with that carbon sequestering value. So that's another fun thing is we try to be a little bit of an innovation lab. Like where can we take a technology and test it out?
A question from Zach: if the $100,000 grant program came from a millage or government budget?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to take this in a slightly different a different way because it's both. Because I've only been at the city for about 2.5 years, and I pulled it from both funds. So I am lucky that I have funding from the general fund, but not very much. I have a millage, and it's not a climate millage. Not yet. What it is our county had a public health and safety millage, and it went out for all county services, especially for like mental health and police. Ann Arbor has its own police department. So that portion got rebated back to the community. And when the citizens went to vote, our residents went to vote, our elected leaders said, we want you to know, if you vote for this in Ann Arbor, 40% of whatever this rebate is will go to affordable housing, 40% will go to climate, and 40% or 20% will go to pedestrian safety. 3 areas that are historically underinvested in. And so they put that out. And then when it passed, they stayed true to their word. So for me, this year, that was $940,000 that I got for climate work, but that sunsets when the millage sunsets. So I pull the grant program from either the general fund or from the millage, depending on what else I've got going on. If I've got a really big solar install, I'm working on rooftop solar, I might have to pull it from the general fund because I'm saving a big tranche over here. So I sort of pull it back and forth.
Jean asked what you thought of carbon taxing. What you think of it?
I think many things about carbon taxing. Locally or like a carbon fee and dividend? Locally. We can't. For Michigan law, we do not believe that we are allowed to do that. It is something that we have investigated. We will continue to kind of push at different angles. I spend a not insignificant amount of time with lawyers, really asking questions and understanding where we have space in Michigan law. I will not let any more out, but I continue to investigate what we call a tax versus a fee. And there's a lot of gray area there. So I think there might be some space. Let me say the way that I have more approached this though is to get a social cost of carbon on the books. So that instead of me having to do like a tax, why are we not having our utilities factor in a social cost of carbon? Because I pay that. You pay that as taxpayers. The impacts of climate change that we say are externalities, they are paid by your local government. They are the places that flood. They're the places that have to deal with the public health crisis that comes upon us. And so we're paying for that already. I would like to see the corporations that are causing the climate crisis and extracting from us pay those costs. So I will continue to fight for that as opposed to necessarily a tax front and center. Carbon fee and dividend, generally supportive. I'm trying to read these things here.
There's a question a little bit earlier from Mary Jo asking about the U of M campus account for 30% and wondering, like, is that due to its sheer size or are there other factors, and what changes hold the most promise for achieving carbon neutrality across that campus?
Yeah, so it's largely due to its size and its built infrastructure that the university has. It's really hard to disentangle the commuting patterns associated with the University of Michigan because that's just not how the regional entity tracks. You know, they don't know that it's a student going to the U or someone going to the hospital at the U in that same way. So we know it's actually higher because of those factors. So this really is the built infrastructure and a little bit from like the buses that run in the community, but that's like infinitesimal compared to the built infrastructure. I would say, if you're curious, we have our draft recommendations out from the President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality for how we're proposing the university achieve carbon neutrality. Please take a look at those. I believe it's now closed public comment, but we did extend for a while, so I might be wrong if you'd like to give input there. The biggest catch that we're going for is a geothermal system throughout the entire university.
Frank put in a plug for a little shout out to trees is the best carbon sequestration approach. And then Jane asked if folks could have a copy of the plan.
Oh yeah, I dropped the link. Oh, I think I sent it directly to Dave. I'm sorry. I'll drop the link to the plan in here for everybody.
Oh yeah, I see okay.
Oh yeah, it's there.
And then Megan asked, you acknowledge that decreasing VMT is super hard because it's very much personal choices. How are you tackling that or planning to?
Yeah. So for me, the rationale has always been you have to have an alternative, right? If we don't have good transit, if you have literally no choice but to drive and you have to go to work, then I haven't done our job. Right. So the first thing is make sure there's an alternative available to people. So investments in public transit, regional rail, those are things that we're working on actively. Walking and biking, putting in more protected bike lanes, sidewalks, and then land use. You have to be able to walk and bike to somewhere you want to go. If the closest grocery store is still 5 miles away, you're not going to walk to it. So we've got to also tackle the land use issues that I will say something that people probably will not like, which is we should have a real reckoning about single family zoning and what that perpetuates in our society. I have wealth and I am capable of accumulating more wealth because of that system. And a lot of people are excluded from that system. And it's really a tough land use pattern to perpetuate. We do not have enough space for everyone to own a home in that way. And so I think we have to struggle with the way our neighborhoods look and how accessible they are and who they're accessible to and who is not in our neighborhoods. So that's a conversation we work a lot on. So make the infrastructure possible, and then you can start talking about sticks, right? So we have the one thing that we put in this plan that the public despised, dead, was tiered parking. We're going to raise parking rates, but I am not going to raise parking rates, especially for low-income people, until I give them an alternative, because otherwise that is unjust. So that's in. People hate it. Got a lot of comments on that, but it's in.
There's a couple of comments that, and I think a question that were, I think, probably inadvertently like in a direct message to me. So I'm going to repaste and copy those to everybody. But Michelle asked a question: if Michigan building codes permitted, would Ann Arbor support mandating all new development run on renewable energy?
Ish. The reality of, because we're working on a lot of calculations, we've been working with developers. Many sites don't have enough space for renewables, especially if you go up and you have a limited rooftop space, and not everywhere has great geothermal potential. So I would say, yes, as long as you allow flexible mechanisms. So if you want on-site, that's not actually possible on every site. And so I don't want to stop that from where I want development, right? Like if it's a good spot for development, I want them to be able to buy into a community solar program if we have it. So I just want to make sure we're flexible in what we build. I would say I'm much more interested in getting them all electric. I would like no more gas hookups if I could get it, because I can't make gas clean, but I can make electric clean. Ooh, I see some good ones.
Yeah, there's a comment from Dave and then a question from Joanne. Maybe it's better if you just read that one.
I'm working on that. Oh, heating and great. Thank you very much for that.
And also I should just say too, I'm skipping over all the nice comments. You're getting some kudos in there. People appreciate it. So I don't want to be like glossing over that, Dr. Stults.
Thank you. Yes, so electric is complicated, the electric system. If for an EV, if you switch off gas and go to an EV and plug that thing in, you still save greenhouse gas emissions today with today's grid. It is still a better choice. If you switch all of your appliances over, it gets complicated. This is why you need to bundle things together. I will speak from, we have a model that we've built with the average Ann Arbor home. It's super technical. It walks through every appliance, the electric load. It walks through scenarios with solar or geothermal or grid connectivity. It works through if you sign up for My Green Power. Like we're actively building these models to understand these exact questions. I'm going to come at from my lived experience. I am transitioning my home. And it is, we started with our water heater, we just did the induction, and we're pricing out geothermal and a heat pump, right? Very expensive to do it in the way that we're doing it. It is far easier, as I said before, build it right the first time, so you don't have to do all of these expensive upgrades. Actually, the first appliance we switched out was our dryer. And, we should be using a hang dryer. I'm going to own that. But in the winter, we are running our dryer, and our electric spikes when we turn that thing on, right? We have solar and we have storage. And so that helps manage that profile. And we know that we try to time it, right? Like when we run our appliances, it takes more work. I have to pay attention more to my behaviors and what I do and when I do it than I would have normally if I wasn't paying attention to climate or cared as much. So I will say we don't have credit anymore. Our solar, we used to have a credit that would carry over. We don't, but is that okay? It's a complicated question, and efficiency has to be at the table for this very reason, because if you just increase demand, we have very high electric rates. You've got to drive down how much you're using as a base load at the same time that you're making these transitions, or else you'll never make the economics make sense.
Any sense about the average cost for like one household to upgrade?
To upgrade everything?
Yeah, I guess.
Nope, because it's so different depending on where you are. One of the things I will say we're investigating very early on is the potential for neighborhood geothermal. So is there a space where I am totally throwing out an idea, right? So please no one go tell like your friends that Ann Arbor is doing this, because like we're not there. But I am curious, and I'm starting to ask questions about if we're doing road projects, can we put geothermal in the right of way and then people can pay to connect to that? And so that would drastically drive down costs. But then you have to figure out how are we paying for it in the right of way. So like there's a lot of questions that I still have to work out, but those are the kinds of solutions we're trying to explore to really, what can we do to keep lowering cost and access to these technologies? You guys are doing great. Stand with us. I'll go back into the chat. I have another one. What? Will the city? What? I don't know. I did get. This was a really hard process. I was reflecting on this earlier. The adoption of A2ZERO was fascinating. right? I often tell people the easiest thing you can do is set a goal, which often can be contentious, like 100% renewables. But setting that goal is just a thing. The second hardest thing is the plan itself. And the hardest is implementing it, right? Like that's really, really tough. Doing the legislative change, the policy, putting the money at it. And I knew the plan would be hard. Getting it adopted was exhausting. We spent easily 40 hours with council members, in front of council members, being drilled with questions. You know, people were looking for holes because it was such a big commitment that they wanted to deflate. They wanted to deflate that balloon, right? And in the end, they couldn't find it, but they still didn't want it, right? So like for some people, it was a real hard pill to swallow because they knew they needed to, but they were like, this is just so big and challenging. And when they did, I think now, because of that really painful process we went through, it's theirs. Like I hear them in discussions, they still really struggle with things, and appropriately so. Like these are really important decisions that they are making. But I also hear them say things like, we agreed we are in a crisis. We need to act like we're in a crisis. And that's said on the council floor, you know, not by everyone, but it's actively said. And so it was really hard for the team. I mean, 82 days. We actually had 80 public meetings scheduled. 12 got canceled because of COVID. I mean, they ran, like they just sprinted the whole time. And imagine, if you will, where we are is we're now sprinting some days, but always running a marathon. So there's just a lot. I'm really sensitive to the resilience of my team and their mental health in this space because they're tired. So will they give me staff? That was a total tirade to say something that was randomly in my mind. What I will say is they actually did give me permission to hire 9 to go 3 up, but then COVID hit. And so we froze it. So I have permission to bring more people onto the team. I just can't at the moment. Send very qualified people my way.
Jim asked what role geothermal plays in the energy budget for Ann Arbor.
It actually doesn't. We looked pretty heavily. We've done lots of wind studies. Nope, like we don't have wind at scale here. Solar was really the most viable alternative. And then we had done some initial geothermal analysis at some sites and we didn't have very good success or high potential. But the technology has come so much further from, you know, a decade ago when some initial studies were done that we're ready to kind of reopen that up. So this would be a case where the plan will change. I'm confident we're going to find really high viability for geothermal in some areas and we'll bring it into the fold. I just don't know what I don't know yet.
Couple questions about other counties. Wondering if Washtenaw County or Macomb County has a plan or staffing.
Washtenaw County has made the same commitment we have to be carbon neutral by 2030. So we are in discussions with them. I used to serve on their council, their community council, and stepped down to do more staff collaboration so that I could steal from them. They're doing some extraordinary work in terms of county operations and getting their house in order. And we're, I would argue, doing a very poor job there and a really good job at community work. And so that's where I see really strategic kind of alignment. So Washtenaw County is in their infancy. I would say they're at a toddlerhood in their work from the community facing side and growing. I expect to see great things coming out of the county. I don't know as much about Macomb. Yeah, sorry. I can tell you individual cities that are doing great work in the area, but that's about it.
Mary Jo and Barb are giving you some right-ons there too. Keep it going and acknowledging how exhausting advocating can be. So good stuff.
Thank you. Well, I certainly don't want to bore you. I'm happy to stick around if anyone has any other questions. But I just want to thank you all for the advocacy and the work that you do. This is literally only possible because of the army of people who care really deeply and desperately about this work. So thank you for caring.
Thank you. Oh, got a couple of, oh, you scared people. They're like, no, no, don't go yet, don't go yet, don't go yet.
Okay, I saw a community choice aggregation one in there. Do you, yep.
Yeah.
What role does community choice aggregation? If anyone has looked at our plan, community choice aggregation is really high for us as a priority. It is not legally allowed in Michigan. What community choice, we have a, that's not fully true. We have a 10% cap on choice in the electric market. So 10% of our market can go out and can just acquire electricity wherever. It is fully subscribed. There's a ridiculous wait list, and it tends to be the big manufacturers because they can eat that up and they're sophisticated enough to go to market. Community choice aggregation is a policy mechanism that would allow me as my residents would vote, and they would give me permission to go out and acquire energy on behalf of all Ann Arborites. And I would do that so that we were buying renewable energy. And that would mean people would have to bid. DT could bid, consumers could bid, another place could bid, and we could put specifics around what we wanted. You know, we want some of that to be local, we want some of that to be here, we're open to anything. It has to displace fossil fuels, however you want to structure it. And there are a lot. I saw someone on the line, so I will be a little careful about this response. Sometimes our utilities will tell us, look at this example of CCA and how it failed. And often what I will say is, look at that example of CCA from 1980. Of course it's different now. That was a different time. Why don't you look at this example that is what we would call CCA 3.0, which is inherently about community benefits and justice. And let's talk about that. Let's not talk about that, because I don't want that. I want this, and give me this. So we have no choice right now to go out and do that kind of procurement. And we think we should. We think we should have more choice in the market. So we're going to keep working with our legislators to introduce legislation that would open up the market. And then I would like to start procuring, and I would like others to follow. I would like to write RFPs that get us renewable energy at cost parity with what we're paying for dirty coal that's killing us. So that's what I would like.
Okay, Garrett, should we have one last question?
Yeah, maybe Charlie gives us that last question, sort of thinking about sort of future steps. He asked for maybe a list of some cities in Southeast Michigan that are trying to exert some leadership. And then yeah, we can wrap up.
Highland Park, Ferndale, Royal Oak, Detroit, Ypsilanti, Pittsfield Township, Ann Arbor Township, City of Ann Arbor, actually Oakland County, a little bit of staff murmuring around some issues that people want to step up on.
Farmington Hills?
Ish. They're not as much active in our space. Like I think up and coming, we're going to see a lot more happening. Those are the ones that are front of mind from a city. Like I'm coming from like a staff that are talking to staff perspective. So no disrespect for all of you organizing in your communities. This is really like thinking about the cities themselves that are putting like money into this, training staff, sending staff to these kinds of discussions.
Okay, well, listen, I think we'll stop it there. And Missy, this has been wonderful. And I know you've answered a lot of my questions, and I'm certain everyone else's too. So good luck going forward, and we'll have you back in a year and we'll see what's coming next. Everybody wave goodbye to Missy.
Thank you all. Take care. Be safe.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time.